Chapter 20, page 83. Whether fortresses and many other things which are made and done by princes every day are useless or useful. Some princes have disarmed their subjects so as to hold their states securely. Some others have kept their subject towns divided. Some have nourished enmities against themselves. Some others have turned to gaining to themselves those who have been subject to them at the beginning of their states. Some have built fortresses. Some have knocked them down and destroyed them. And although one cannot give a definite judgment on all these things unless one comes to the particulars of those states where any such decision has to be made, nonetheless, I shall speak in the broad mode which the matter permits in itself. There has never been then a new prince who has disarmed his subjects. On the contrary, whenever he has found them unarmed, he has always armed them. For when they are armed, those arms become yours. Those whom you suspected become faithful, and those who were faithful remain so. And from subjects they are made into your partisans. And because all subjects cannot be armed, if those whom you arm are benefited, one can act with more security toward the others. The difference of treatment that they recognize regarding themselves makes them obligated to you, and the others excuse you, judging it necessary that those who have more danger and more obligation deserve more. But when you disarm them, you begin to offend them. You show that you distrust them either for cowardice or for lack of faith, both of which opinions generate hatred against you. And because you cannot remain unarmed, you must turn into a mercenary military, which is of the quality described above. And even if it were good, it cannot be so good as to defend you against powerful enemies and suspect subjects. So as I said, a new prince of a new principality always has ordered the arms there. The histories are full of examples of this. But when a prince acquires a new state, that has added a member to his old one, then it is necessary to disarm that state, except for those who were your partisans in acquiring it. These two it is necessary to render soft and effeminate in time and with opportunity, and to be ordered so that the arms of all your state are only with your own soldiers who live next to you in your old state. Our ancients and those who were esteemed wise used to say that it was necessary to hold Pistoia with parties and Pisa with fortresses. And because of this, they nourished differences in some towns subject to them, so as to hold them more easily. In times when Italy was in balance in a certain mode, this would have been good to do, but I do not believe that one could give it today as a teaching, for I do not believe that divisions ever do any good. On the contrary, when the enemy approaches, of necessity divided cities are immediately lost, because the weaker party always joins the external forces, and the other will not be able to rule. The Venetians, moved as I believe by the reasons written above, nourished the Guelph and Ghibelline sects in the city subject to them. Although the Venetians never let them come to blood, still they nourished these contentions among them, so that occupied as those citizens were with their differences, they did not unite against the Venetians. So the Guelph and the Ghibelline sects, the Venetians divided and conquered. As may be seen, this did not turn out according to their plan later, because when they were defeated at Vailla, one party immediately became daring and took all their state from them. Such modes therefore imply weakness in the prince, for in a vigorous principality such divisions are never permitted, because they bring profit only in time of peace, as subjects can be managed more easily through them. But when war comes, such an order shows its own fallaciousness. Without doubt, princes become great when they overcome difficulties made for them and opposition made to them. So fortune, especially when she wants to make a new prince great, since he has a greater necessity to acquire reputation than a hereditary prince, makes enemies arise for him and makes them undertake enterprises against him, so that he has cause to overcome them and to climb higher on the ladder that his enemies have brought for him. Therefore many judge that a wise prince, when he has the opportunity for it, should astutely nourish some enmity, so that when he has crusted his greatness, emerges the more from it. Princes, and especially those that are new, have found more faith and more utility in those men who at the beginning of their states were held to be suspect than those whom they trusted at the beginning. Pandolfo Petrucci, Prince of Siena, ruled his state more with those who had been suspect to him than with the others. But one cannot speak broadly of the same, because it varies according to the subject. I will only say this, that the prince will always be able to win over to himself with the greatest of ease those men who in the beginning of a principality had been enemies, and who are of such quality that to maintain themselves they need somewhere to lean. They are all the more forced to serve him faithfully, as they know it is more necessary for them to cancel out with deeds the sinister opinion one has taken of them, and so the prince always extracts more use from them than from those who, while serving him with too much security, neglect his affairs. And since the matter requires it, I do not want to leave out a reminder to princes who have newly taken a state through internal support within it, that they consider well what cause moved those who supported them to support them, if it is not natural affection toward them, but only because those supporters were not content with that state. He will be able to keep them his friends with trouble and great difficulty, because it is impossible for him to make them content. And while reviewing well the cause of this, with examples drawn from ancient and modern things, he will see that it is much easier to gain as friends to himself men who were content with the state beforehand, and therefore were his enemies, than those who, because they were not content with it, became friends and gave him support and seasoned it. It has been the custom of princes, so as to be able to hold their states more securely, to build fortresses that would be a bridle and a bit for those who might plan to act against them, and to have a secure refuge from sudden attack. I praise this mode because it has been used since antiquity. Nonetheless, in our times, Messer Niccolo Vitelli was seen to destroy 2 fortresses in Città di Castello, in order to hold that state, when Guidobaldo, Duke of Urbino, returned to his dominion, from which Caesar Borgia had expelled him. He razed all the fortresses in that province to their foundations, and he judged that without them he would with greater difficulty lose his state again. When Bentivogli returned to Bologna, they adopted similar measures. Fortresses are thus useful or not according to the times, and if they do well for you in one regard, they hurt you in another. And one may discuss this issue thus: the prince who has more fear of the people than of foreigners ought to make fortresses, but the one who has more fear of foreigners than of the people ought to omit them. The castle in Milan, built by Francesco Sforza has brought and will bring more war to the Sforza house than any other disorder of that state. Therefore, the best fortress there is not to be hated by the people, because although you may have fortresses, if the people hold you in hatred, fortresses do not save you. If the people hold you in hatred, fortresses do not save you. For to peoples who have taken up arms, foreigners will never be lacking to come to their aid. In our times, fortresses have not been seen to bring profit to any prince, unless to the Countess of Forli, when Count Girolamo, her consort, died. For by means of a fortress she was able to escape a popular uprising, to await help from Milan, and to recover her state. And the times then were such that a foreigner could not help the people, but later fortresses were worth little to her when Caesar Borgia attacked her, and her hostile people joined with the foreigner. Therefore, then and before, it would not have been more secure for her not to be hated by the people than to have had fortresses. So having considered all these things, I shall praise whoever makes fortresses and whoever does not, and I shall blame anyone who, trusting in fortresses, thinks little of being hated by the people. This story is told in vivid detail. Discourses on Livy 3, 6 in Florentine Histories, 834, chapter 21. What a prince should do to be held in high esteem. Nothing makes a prince so much esteemed as to carry on great enterprises and to give rare examples of himself. In our times we have Ferdinand of Argonne, the present king of Spain. This man can be called an almost new prince, because from being a weak king he has become by fame and by glory the first king among the Christians. And if you consider his actions, you will find them all very great, and some of them extraordinary. In the beginning of his reign he attacked Granada, and that enterprise was the foundation of his state. First he made it at leisure, and without fear of being interfered with. He kept the minds of the barons of Castile preoccupied while thinking of that war. They did not think of innovating, and in the meantime he acquired reputation and power over them which they did not perceive. He was able to sustain armies with money from the church and the people, and with that long war to lay a foundation for his own military, which later brought him honor. Besides this, in order to undertake greater enterprises, always making use of religion, he turned to an act of pious cruelty, expelling the Moranos from his kingdom and despoiling it of them. Nor could there be an example more wretched and rare than this. He attacked Africa under the same cloak, made his campaign in Italy, and has lately attacked France, and so he has always done, and ordered great things, from which have always kept the minds of his subjects in suspense and admiration, and occupied with their outcome. And his actions have followed upon one another in such a mode that he has never allowed an interval between them for men to be able to work quietly against him. It also helps very much for a prince to give rare examples of himself and govern internally, similar to those that are told of Messer Bernardo de Milano, when the opportunity arises of someone who works for something extraordinary in civil life, either for good or for ill, and of picking the mode of rewarding or punishing him, of which much will be said. And above all, prince should contrive to give himself the fame of a great man and of an excellent talent in every action of his. A prince is also esteemed when he is a true friend and a true enemy. That is, when without any hesitation he discloses himself in support of someone against another. This course is always more useful than to remain neutral, because if two powers close to you come to grips, either they are of such quality that if one wins you have to fear the winner, or not. In either of these two cases it will always be more useful to you to disclose yourself and to wage open war. For in the first case, if you do not disclose yourself, you will always be the prey of whoever wins, to the pleasure and satisfaction of the one who was defeated, and you have no reason nor anything to defend you or give you refuge. For whoever wins does not once suspect friends who may not help him in adversity. Whoever loses does not give you refuge, since you did not want to share his fortune with arms in hand. Antiochus came into Greece, summoned there by the Aetolians to expel the Romans from it. Antiochus sent spokesmen to the Achaeans, who were friends of the Romans, to urge them to remain in the middle. And on the other side, the Romans sought to persuade them to take up arms for them. This matter came up for decision in the council of the Achaeans, where the legate from the Antiochus was persuading them to remain neutral, to which the Roman legate responded as to what they say. Moreover, that you should not intervene in the war. Nothing is more alien to your interest. Without thanks, without dignity, you will be the prize of the victor. And it will always happen that the one who is not friendly will seek your neutrality, and he who is friendly to you will ask that you declare yourself with arms. And irresolute princes, in order to escape present dangers, follow that neutral way most times, and most times come to ruin. But when the prince discloses himself boldly in support of one side, if the one to whom you adhere wins, although he is powerful and you remain at his discretion, he has an obligation to you and has a contract of love for you. And men are never so indecent as to crush you with so great an example of ingratitude. Then two victories are never so clear that the winner does not have to have some respect, especially for justice. But if the one to whom you adhere loses, you are given refuge by him, and he helps you while he can. and you become the companion of a fortune that can revive. In the second case, when those who fight together are of such quality that you do not have to fear the one who wins, so much the greater is the prudence of joining sides, for you assist in the ruin of one with the aid of the other who ought to save him. If he were wise, and when he has won, he remains at your discretion, and with your aid it is impossible that he not win. And here it is to be noted that a prince must be aware never to associate with someone more powerful than himself, so as to attack others except when necessity presses, as was said above. For when you win, you are left as prisoners, and princes should avoid as much as they can, being at the discretion of others. The Venetians accompanied France against the Duke of Milan, and they could have avoided being in that company from which their ruin resulted. But when one cannot avoid it, as happened to the Florentines when the Pope in Spain went to their armies to attack Lombardy, then the prince should join for the reasons given above, nor should any state ever believe that it can always adopt safe courses. On the contrary, it should think it has to take them all as doubtful. For in the order of things, it is found that one never seeks to avoid inconvenience without running into her. But prudence consists in knowing how to recognize the qualities of inconveniences and in picking the less bad as good. A prince should also show himself a lover of the virtues, giving recognition to virtuous men, and he should honor those who are excellent in an art. Next, he should inspire his citizens to follow their pursuits quietly, in trade, in agriculture, and in every other pursuit of men, so that one person does not fear to adorn his possessions for fear they may be taken away from him, and another to open up a trade for fear of taxes. But he should prepare rewards for whoever wants to do these things, and for anyone who thinks up any way of expanding his city or his state. Besides this, he should, at suitable times of the year, keep the people occupied with festivals and spectacles, because every city is divided into guilds or into clans, a bunch of tribes. He should take account of those communities, meet with them sometimes, and make himself an example of humanity and munificence, always holding firm the majesty of his dignity, nonetheless, because he can never want this to be lacking in anything. Of those whom princes have as secretaries, chapter 22. Page 92. The choice of ministers is of no small importance to a prince. They are good or not according to the prudence of the prince. And the first conjecture that is to be made of the brain of a lord is to see the men he has around him, and when they are capable and faithful, he can always be reputed wise, because he has known how to recognize them as capable and to maintain them as faithful. But if they are otherwise, one can always pass unfavorable judgment on him, because the first error he makes in this choice. There was no one who knew Monsieur Antonio da Vinafro as minister of Pandolfo Petrucci, Prince of Siena, who did not judge Pandolfo to be a most worthy man, since he had Antonio as his minister. And since there are three kinds of brains, one that understands by itself, another that discerns what others understand, the third that understands neither by itself nor through others, the first is most excellent, the second excellent, and the third useless. It follows, therefore, of necessity, that if Pandolfo was not in the first rank, he was in the second. For every time that one has the judgment to recognize the good or evil that someone does or says, although he does not have the inventiveness by himself, he knows the bad deeds and the good of his minister, and extols the one and corrects the others, and corrects the other. The minister cannot hope to deceive him and remains good himself. But as to how a prince can know his minister, here is a mode that never fails. When you see a minister thinking more of himself than of you, and in all actions looking for something useful to himself, one so made will never be a good minister. Never will you be able to trust him, because he who has someone's state in his hands should never think of himself, but always of the prince, and he should never remember anything that does not pertain to the prince. And on the other side, the prince should think of the minister so as to keep him good, honoring him, making him rich, obligating him to himself, sharing honors and burdens with him, so that he sees he cannot stand without the prince. so that many honors do not make him desire more honors, much wealth does not make him desire more wealth, and many burdens make him fear changes. When therefore ministers and princes in relation to ministers are so constituted that they can trust one another, when it is otherwise, the end is always damaging, either for one or the other. 23, coming up, in what mode flatterers are to be avoided. Page 93. Peace!